Welcome to part 3 of the beginner build series where I teach you, a beginner, to beat other beginners and maybe even intermediate players. As exciting as that sounds. Today we're going to go over Tzeentch. Tzeentch is one of my favorite factions, but also a faction that requires a lot of finesse. This is going to be a trickier one, I think, to make recommendations because I feel like a lot of the strengths around Tzeentch are based on some of their kiting elements, and I don't really recommend kiting for beginners. So let's just go through maybe what I consider like a pretty standard army for Tzeentch. So I think in general, the Chaos Lord sorcerer on a disc here, Disc of Tzeentch, is very strong. This is a great option in general. Today I'm actually gonna recommend that you do the Chaos Lord on a disc, and let's see. These two units are not good, or sorry, these two are not good. Colossal Strike is sometimes good, and Change or Die is sometimes good. So Colossal Strike gives you more damage output and more of a chance to hit large things. And then Change or Die is useful for the damage resistance and leadership. And we're not going to bring this. It can be good, but it's a pretty small heal, so not humongous. So the reason that I'm recommending you bring this Chaos Lord of Tzeentch is so that you have a little bit of poke against, like let's say that your opponent brings a large lord. So he's a good tool to do damage and chase around a large lord. Similarly, you can add an Exalted Hero if you want to go heavier in that style, but let's just recommend that you bring this. I recommended Metal, and I think Metal is still a good choice. In the Chaos Dwarf video, I recommended you take the Lore of Metal. Still a good choice, especially with the Skull of Catan. But let's recommend the Lore of Tzeentch here, and I'll show you what is useful here. You can leave these, you can bring them. I'm actually going to get rid of Skull of Catan here. I don't think it's so necessary. And then one of my favorite set of spells is Glean Magic. Glean Magic is very good now with the Silence. Overcast, it lasts almost a minute, I think. So it's a lot of time that your opponent can't cast spells, so that's very useful. The magic recharge is not the best for you, but it's enough that it's worth it for the Silence, right? Blue Fire is still a very strong spell against a lot of targets, small targets, monstrous infantry. It doesn't do a huge amount of damage, but it does significant damage. And then you can bring Pink Fire if you expect your opponent to have a lot of unarmored things, but I'm just going to recommend Infernal Gateway. This spell is so brainless. You just click, you overcast it on a unit, deletes a unit. So it's very convenient. Even if this spell kit is a little expensive, again, the Infernal Gateway is nice to have, and it's pretty strong. So now, Tzeentch, unlike dwarves, Tzeentch is very good at capturing points early. So I'd actually recommend maybe 3 Zangors. These units are pretty good at holding on their own, so it's not like you're so worried about them getting caught or something, and they have silver shields and armor, so if your opponent brings light skirmishers, they're pretty fine. And then as a secondary, let's actually bring the Sour Guts. The Sour Guts is really good. It explodes and does a lot of damage in return. They did nerf it a little bit recently. Let's see, is the nerf significant enough? But I think this is a pretty good unit. It puts a lot of pressure on your opponent to respond to it. And we like to have some form of archers. And in that vein, let's bring 2 archers. And now some marauders to prevent these guys from getting into trouble. We'll support them with the marauders. now let's just bring a Chaos Warrior. And in fact, let's just bring a Halberd. I prefer the regular warriors, but because I don't know what faction you're going to be playing this against, it might make sense to have a little bit of anti-large. So you stick these guys behind. So basically it would look like this, where like so these guys go in front, like way in front, in the Vanguard deployment. These guys are front line. These shoot behind the front line, and this stands behind the shooters and protects them if any cav or something comes to jump on them. Okay, then as a secondary, Tzeentch doesn't have the best cavalry options. We're going to bring one Centaur of Tzeentch. These can be very good, but they're very squishy, so I'm not going to recommend a beginner brings too many of them. And in fact, to compensate for that, I'm actually going to recommend that you bring a Chaos Knight of Tzeentch, just so that you have a little bit more mobility. They're very expensive, but that's kind of one of Tzeentch's weaknesses, that we don't have a lot of mobility. Instead, ground mobility, that is. Instead, we're going to rely a little bit more heavily on air fighting. So we're going to bring the Shrieking Sky Rays. It's very strong. So like we compare the two, it has quite a bit more stats, and then it's this thing is very good. So it's very good for killing lightly armored stuff. A humongous bonus versus large, so it's worth sticking this, especially if you're fighting against something in the skies. It's very good at that. And then I'm actually going to recommend that you bring one Changebringer. And so this might seem a little weird because you're a beginner. Why am I recommending a Changebringer? It's kind of like the gyros that I said in the last game. A Changebringer is a unit that if your opponent has no answer for the Changebringers and you save up for the Changebringers, it can win the game for you in a matter of 5 minutes, or even less, 2 minutes. So even as a beginner, it's worth practicing with this unit because it's just so good, it's hard to pass up on. Now, for the rest of the army, I think I'm going to recommend a little bit of armor. And in fact, let's just recommend the Forsaken. I wouldn't recommend this for people above beginner, but because we are beginners here, we're going to be relying on the Forsaken to get there quickly. So these will be doing damage. Actually, let's just do one Forsaken and we'll do 2 Zangors. I like that. And then I'll recommend a blue horror. I don't think blues I think they're a difficult unit to do well, but they're very good shooting. So you want to get all of their ammo off before they get into melee. If you don't, they're a little bit underused. So they have poor melee stats relative to their price. So you really need to get the ammo off. But they're very good, especially at hitting large things, and they have really high model. So they actually throw a lot of missiles. So yeah, so this is a standard army. You might have a little bit of trouble with this army with large things. If you're expecting your opponent to bring a lot of large stuff, you drop the Zangors and bring something like spears. I think that's okay. You can also think about bringing large monsters, but in general, I think this build is a good place to start. The last thing I wanted to mention, I didn't mention this before. Notice how I'm like leaving a little bit of money on the table. It's because in general, if it's coming from this part, it's not that cost effective to pay more because you have to wait longer to summon these units. And the amount of stats that you get for like 30 gold is like very small. So you just get 1 and 1 and 1. It's not really that useful. But in the starting army, if you expect to resummon a unit, you don't want to put this on because again, you have to wait for it. If you don't expect to resummon a unit, it's fine to put the chevrons because I don't expect to resummon this pink horror. It's an archer. Summoning archers late in the game is usually not a good idea. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of extra stats, a little bit of extra melee and reload. So that's something that you can do on a unit that you don't expect to resummon. So I'll save this army. Make sure that you always save your armies. So let's say Tzeentch beginner, so that you can just load them up later. You can make any small adjustments that you need. So yeah, so this Tzeentch army is good for, let's say, getting on the points quickly, having some shooting DPS, having some DPS in the secondary, and having a little bit of poke in the Lord. But yeah, thank you for watching video number 3. This is Tzeentch. Let me know what you want to see next in the comments, and I will do some of your suggestions. So thanks, and see you later.